Okay, so Kuf Dalad Amud Aleph, and we're now starting on the page Kuf Dalad. And at the end of the daf yesterday in Kuf Gimel, at the bottom, we saw Rava's first Havdalah, which is very similar to the one we do today, but this is the one that is quoted there, and they're going to discuss it. The Havdalah that he said was Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol, ben Ol Choshech, ben Yisrael Amim, ben Yom HaShvi l'Sheshit Yemei HaMaaseh. And then he would finish off, we're not actually sure, later on we'll discuss how it finishes off, but basically it'll finish off Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol. Rav Yaakov bar Abba, who was there at the time, wasn't sure why he had all these different Hamavdils. All he's doing is trying to talk about Shabbat going out. Why does he have to talk about all these other things? He said, Lama lach kulehai. Why do you have to make such a fuss? Why do you have to do all these things? And so the answer that is given at the time, this is all we learned this yesterday, V'hamar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, because he says, this isn't the answer, this is actually the question. He says, why do you make all the fuss? Because Rav says, Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol, that is the whole of Havdalah according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. If that's good enough for Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, why is it not good enough for you? That's the basic question here. I would have thought that if it was good enough for Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, it should be good enough for anybody, and so why do you need to do more? To which Rava answered, I hold, according to this opinion, that Rabbi Elazar ben Amar Rabbi Yoshaya. This opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yoshaya, and he said the following. He said, Hapochet lo yifchot mishalosh. You should never have fewer than three. Never have fewer than three hamavdils, and you should never have more than seven. V'amosef lo yosif al sheva. And you should never have more than seven. And today we're going to deal with a lot of that. But the first thing that we see is quite obvious if you actually count. He says that if you actually count, you see Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba actually bothered to count. He goes, V'ha amar lo tlata amar v'lo sheva amar. But you didn't say 3 and you didn't say 7. Look at it. Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol, ben Or Choshech, ben Yisrael La'amim, ben Yom HaShvi l'Sheish Yemei HaMaaseh. As far as I can see, that's 4, not 3, and not 7. So why do you do that many? And so Rav answers, Rava Amar, he answers to him, he says as follows, Ivra means true. I think it's actually from the Latin, Ivra, as in veritas. Anyway, but that seems to be true. Ivra, you're absolutely right. There are 4 here, but the last one, Ben Yom HaShvi l'Sheish Yemei HaMaaseh, doesn't really count, because that is actually an introduction to the ending. The introduction to the ending of the bracha, because you finish off and you say, Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol. And if in order to finish off like your ending is, you have all the rest of brachot, Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol, ben Ol Choshech, ben Yisrael Amim. And in order to have something similar to the end, you finish off B'Yom HaShvi l'Sheish Yemei HaMaaseh is basically a signing off line. And as we know, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, okay, he says, Hamavdil tzarich shiomar me'ein chatima samuch l'chatimato. So he says that Rav Yehuda says that when you do finish the bracha, you need to have you have to finish off the way you're going to make the bracha itself. So you need to finish off with something that's like the bracha itself. And in this case, the bracha is Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol. So I'm going to finish off. I'm dividing between the day, the 6 days of the week, and the day of Shabbat. Okay, that's Shmuel's opinion. But in Pompadita, they learned differently. They said, in fact, you do have to have some kind of signing off, but the signing off doesn't match the end. It actually supposed to match the beginning. The beginning of the bracha. So in this case, we've got Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol, ben Or Choshech, ben Yisrael Amim, and now we're signing off with ben Yom HaShvi l'Sheish Yemei HaMaaseh. That's supposed to match the Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol at the beginning. So that's basically what's going on here. Either way, it works fine, because the truth is, the ending of this bracha and the beginning of this bracha are exactly the same, Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol. So it doesn't matter which way it's going. So the Gemara actually asks that question, and the Gemara asks, I've made a mess of this, but the Gemara asks, my beinahu. What's the difference between these situations? What's the difference between these different things? And it says, there is a difference between these different things. There is a difference here. What's the difference? So the answer that's given is, the difference is Yom Tov shechal liot achar Shabbat. Yom Tov which falls after Shabbat, because in that case you still start Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol, but you don't end Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol. When you finish with Ben Kodesh L'Kodesh, and if you finish Ben Kodesh L'Kodesh, then the person that says it has to be according to the Yom Tov Shechal Lacha Shabbat Chatimatan Ben Kodesh L'Kodesh, then you finish off with the ending Ben Kodesh L'Kodesh. The person that thinks you have to make your signing off like the bracha, like the bracha, would think that the bracha says Ben Kodesh L'Kodesh, so you have to add something to say sounds like that. So you add Ben Kudushat Shabbat L'Kudushat Yom Tov Ivdalta, which is actually what we say today. So when you finish your bracha, you say Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol, Ben Or L'Choshech, Ben Yisrael Amim, Yom HaShvi L'Shet Yemei HaMaseh, Ben Kudushat Shabbat ve'Ben Kudushat Yom Tov Ivdalta, Baruch Atah Hashem, Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Kodesh. And that's what you would say on Motzei Shabbat that goes into Yom Tov. That would only be the case if you're trying to match your signing off with the ending. If you're trying to match the signing off with the beginning, you started off on Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol, so you don't need to add that extra line, Ben Kudushat Shabbat, Kudushat Yom Tov Hivdalta. You don't need to add that at all. So moving on, we get to the next bit of the Gemara, and the Gemara now says to us, Gufa. Let's go back to the actual issue that's at stake here. What we're discussing here is Amar Rav Elazar ben Ashaya. He said the following. He says, Hapochet lo yifchat mishalosh, v'hamosif lo yosif me'al sheva. The minimum number of brachot should be 3, and the maximum number should be 7. Okay, so let's have a look and see what that actually means. It seems to be that there's a problem with this, because we found a brighter piece of Tanaic material which says, Omer havdalot motzei Shabbatot umotzei yamim tovim. So when you make havdalah on after Shabbos or after Yom Tov, or even the motzei Yom Kippurim, all right, and Motzei Shabbat Yom Tov, and even from Motzei Shabbat to Yom Tov, and Motzei Yom Tov L'Chol Shel Moed, or when you make Hamavdil, in all these cases, Aval Lo Motzei Yom Tov L'Shabbat, you make Havdalah in all those cases, but you do not make Havdalah when it's from Yom Tov to Shabbat, because you seem to be, it's getting even more holy. You don't actually do it. Okay, and in all those cases, Haragil Omer Harbeh v'She'ino Ragil Omer Achat. In all those cases, when the person who's familiar with the brachot will say just one brachot, will say all these brachot, as many as he can, and the one who's not familiar will only say one bracha. So which is strange, because it's not the same as saying 3 and 7. Either it's 1 or a lot. Now, it's possible that a lot means 7, but 1 certainly doesn't mean 3. So what's going on here? And it says, Tanaihi. This is actually an argument amongst the Tanaim, right? Because Rabbi Yochanan, who's actually an Amorah, but he says in the name of Banan Shel Kedoshim, we'll see afterwards in a second who Banan Shel Kedoshim is, Hu Omer Achat. So there are those that say you have to do 1, V'nagu ha'am lomar shalosh, but the people actually decided to say 3. And who are the people that were Banan Shel Kedoshim? Who are these people? He says, Rabbi Menachem ben Sar bar Samai, who is a Tana. And what does he say? He says, why did they call him the son of the Kodshim, the Holy One, right? He was so holy that he would not even look at the picture on a coin. When he was using coinage, he wouldn't even look at the picture of the coin, which could be considered idolatry. And so therefore, he was considered so holy, he wouldn't even look at that. So they try to find out what the halacha is. Shalach Rav Shmuel bar Idi. So the Rav Shmuel bar Idi wrote the following sentence, the following determinism. He says, Chananya achi omer achat. My brother Hananya actually only says the one bracha, but even so, the halacha, late halacha, ilchata kavate, the halacha does not go according to that opinion. Now, moving on, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, right? This is where we get the 7. How do we get this 7? We can actually discuss this now. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Hamavdil, when you make havdalah, tzarich shiomar me'ein havdalot amurot b'Torah. You have to say all the havdalot that are said in the Torah. If you look in the Torah, there's a number of different times when it says Havdalah, Hamavdil. So we're actually making a bracha here. When you say Havdalah, you're actually harking back to all the different divisions that are made in creation, and those are all listed in the Torah, and it goes as follows. It says, how do you do it? Seder Havdalot, how do you do it? It says as follows, and this is actually brought to show that it's not actually 7, but you'll see. Because what does it say? Hamavdil ben Kodesh lechol, ben or lechoshech, ben Yisrael la'amim, ben Yom HaShvi l'shesh Jemei HaMaaseh, ben Tamei l'tahor, ben Yam l'chorava, ben Mayim elyonim l'bayim atachtonim, ben Kohanim l'levim Yisraelim. That's 8. So what we've got here, we've got the division between holy and non-holy, the division in light and dark, which is clearly mentioned in the creation, the difference between Yisrael and the other nations, the difference between the 7th day and the other 6 days of creation, the difference between what's considered pure and what's considered impure, the difference between the land and the dry earth, the difference between the upper waters and the lower waters, again, which is mentioned in the days of creation, and the difference between the Kohanim, Leviim, the Yisraelim, that are all different. So we've got 8 different divisions, but we said there should be 7. So what's going on here? This doesn't seem to work. The writer finishes, by the way, this isn't relevant to what we're saying at the moment, but he says that how do you make the bracha at the end? We say Hamavdil bin Kodesh Lachol, but they say no, you don't make a Hamavdil bin Kodesh Lachol. You finish off by saying Baruch Atah Hashem Seder Bereshit, which is really interesting because as far as that's concerned, what you're saying is the whole bracha is about the order of creation. When you talk about dividing things, division is how you create things. You divide things up, and that's the way something is created. So the divisions, it's almost like a fractal creation. Things get divided and divided and divided, and that way you end up with a whole creation. But acharim omrim b'yotzeh bereshit. Some people say, no, you don't say seder bereshit. It's not the order, it's the act of creation, the creation of the creation, okay, the creation of Genesis, the creator of Genesis. That wouldn't be Peter Gabriel. Rabbi Yossi, the creator of Genesis would be the actual divisions, is what God who's dividing. And Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chotem Mekadesh Yisrael. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda has a very strange ending. He says you don't end with anything to do with the creator at all. You end with Mekadesh Yisrael, because it's actually the people of Israel who actually have the power over the divisions and the power over the Torah. And indeed the power over times to divide things between holy and non-holy. So we've got this set. How are we going to get 7 out of this set of things? We've got 8 things. How are we going to get 7 out of them? So the Gemara goes ahead and divides it up for us and shows us that we can actually turn this into 7 because he said, oh, hang on. If you look at that, you say, actually, one of these, the 4th, the 6th one we have here, it says Bein Hayam Lecharava. All right, Bein Hayam Lecharava is talking about. It is not actually mentioned in the Torah. It doesn't say in the Torah that they who hivdil Bein Hayam Lecharava. It doesn't say the word Havdalah in that context. So therefore, we can take that one off. We strike it through, and we're left with 7. So everything works out well. No, it doesn't, because if you're striking off already, why can't we strike off which is the one we struck off before to make it, because it's like the ending, right? To finish it off. So so we cut it down. Now we cut down too many. Now we're down to 6. So what are we going to do? How are we going to get to this 7? They go, that's easy actually. There's an easy way out of this. What we say is, if you look at the last one was Bein Kohanim Leviim v'Yisraelim. We can divide that up. You've got Bein Kohanim Leviim, and you've got Bein Leviim v'Yisraelim. How do you get that? Kohanim Leviim v'Yisraelim Trei Mileininhu. This is 2 separate things. Bein Leviim Yisraelim is actually written in the Torah because it says Dichtiv be'et hahi hivdil Hashem et Shevet Levi. So he divided Shevet Levi from the others. So the Leviim are clearly divided from Bnei Israel. But Ben Kohanim Leviim also says Dichtiv b'nei Amran Aharon Moshe ve'yibadel Aharon lahakdisho Kodesh Kedoshim. So then you can actually see there are 2 different divisions there. So therefore you can actually make it 7 after all. So it all works out beautifully. If you remember before, we mentioned the Chotem Seder Bereshit. These are the different endings that you could possibly have. Could be Seder Bereshit, could be Yetzer Bereshit, could be Mekadesh Yisrael. It then continues and says, Michtam ma'yechatim. What do we actually use to finish it off with? What is our actual choice to finish off the bracha? And it says what we actually use to finish it off is completely different things. Rav Amar Mekadesh Yisrael. He seems to agree with Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda. And Shmuel says, no. You say Amavdil ben Kodesh Lachol. And not only that, but Layet ala Abaya v'item Rabbi Yosef ahadarav. Later on, they came to actually curse those that said Mekadesh Yisrael, because it's almost like making Yisrael holier than God in some way. So they didn't like that at all. And then it finishes off Tana Shemei the Rabbi Yoshua ben Chanina. There's also a statement said by this Tana, Shemei, a Tana in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Chanina. What did he say? Kol hachotem Mekadesh Yisrael. He actually put them both together. He said the bracha should be Mekadesh Yisrael v'hamavdil ben kodesh lachol, also sanctifying Israel and also blessing the person who divides the holy from the profane. And anyone who says both of those things, marichin lo yamav v'ushnotav, and anyone who says both of those things, we will lengthen his days. And then it goes on to say, however, leit hilchata kavate, the halacha is not like that opinion. So, moving on, and we get back to another visiting. This time we have Ula visiting from Padita, and this is a continuation of the discussion we had before, because when he gets there, Amar le Rav Yehuda, Rav Yitzchak Barei. Rav Yehuda says to Rav Yitzchak Barei, Ula's in town, the famous Ula is in town, let's see what he thinks the halakha is. Let's go with Ula and let's check up, see what the halakha is. So he says to his son, he says, Zil amti le kalkala de pere v'chazi heche davdil. Go and take him a basket of fruit, and while you're there, check and see how he does havdalah. I love this story. This is a beautiful story, because the father says to the son, go and do it. Lo azal, he doesn't go, and when instead of going, he sends someone else. He sends a buyer. Shadale la buyer. He sends a buyer instead. Okay, he's a real chutzpan. He decides, I can't be bothered to go. I'm going to send a buyer instead. So he sends a buyer to do his work for him. Says, go and you take this basket of fruit and find out how he does the bracha. When that buyer came back, he says, so he asks the buyer, how did he make bracha? How did he do it? And the buyer says, he said, Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol, Amar V'tulo. He only says Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol. He doesn't say Mekadesh Yisrael, Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol. He doesn't say Yotzeh Bereshit. He doesn't say Seder Bereshit. He says Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol. That's what Ula does. So he goes on. And he says, fine. So now, armed with the information that he needed to get from his father, he goes back to his father. He goes back to his father and he says to him, and his father says to him, no, Hechi Amar, what did Ula say? To which he says, I didn't go. Ana shadrite lebaya. I sent a buyer to go for me, and the Amarli, and he told me Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol, and he says that Hamavdil ben Kodesh. He says that Ula says Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lachol. Now, to his credit, Rav Yehuda Rav Yitzchak, Rav Yitzchak, the son of Rav Yehuda, does not actually lie and claim to have done it himself. He doesn't. He says, I told Abaya to do it, and Abaya did it for me, which is at least honest. But his father does not like this at all. He's saying Rav Yehuda is going to take this very badly, and he gives him a real tongue lashing by saying, "Oh, so you're the great rabbi, you sir." He comes referring to him as sir all the time. Rav Ranute de Mar, Vasararute de Mar, Garama Leila Mar, the Lote Mashmete Bibume. He goes, "Oh, your greatness, sir, and your haughtiness have caused Sir not to have a halakha named after him, because if he had done this himself, they would say, this halakha is in the name of Rav Yitzchak, who saw Ula do it. But because you're so haughty, because you thought you were so important, you had to send somebody else. Because of that, the halakha is going to be known in the name of a buyer and not in the name of you. So it's a real tongue lashing from his father to teach him to not be so lazy and not be so haughty. But there's actually a piece of Breita which seems to contradict this opinion of Ula, because it says Kol habrachot kulan, every single bracha, right? This is talking generally. Potech b'baruch v'chotem b'hem b'baruch. Every bracha should start baruch and end baruch. Chutz, and then it says the only exceptions to this rule are birchot hamitzvot, birchot haperot, v'birchot smucha lechavertei, ubracha achrona sheb'kriyat Shema. There's a few exceptions to this. There's the brachot we make over mitzvot, like hamaniach tefillin. I say asher kishan misna b'tzivanu laniach tefillin. If you put on tefillin, you don't then say baruch ata Hashem ha mitzavet tefillin. You don't finish off with baruch. You just say one baruch. Similarly, if you eat fruit, baruch ata Hashem b'rei pri hagafen or b'rei pri ha'etz or whatever it is you're going to be saying. That's the bracha which you say, and that's it. You don't finish off Baruch Borei Ha'etz or something like that. You don't do that. And also a bracha which is right next to another bracha, like in the Amida, or a bracha, final bracha of the Shema, which also we know is an exception to this rule, right? And in those cases, shesh behen potach behen b'baruch ve'en chotem b'baruch, and in those cases we do start with baruch and we don't end with a special chatima of baruch. Right? Well, there are some that you finish with baruch and you don't end with baruch. And there's also v'hatov v'hametiv potech baruch ve'eno chotem baruch. And there's also one last one, hatov v'hametiv potech. It starts with a baruch and doesn't end with baruch. Now all these things are brought to show you that Havdalah is not an exception. So Havdalah should start as we do. Baruch atah Hashem l'gam l'cholam, Avdel ben kodesh l'chol, blah, 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 and then Baruch atah Hashem, Avdel ben kodesh l'chol at the end. So it starts with Baruch and ends with Baruch. But Ula seems to say Rak Baruch Avdel ben kodesh l'chol. Kasha Ula seems to be a contradiction to Ula. But no, Amar le Rab Ula. Ula says to you, no, that's not the case. Hanami kebirchat mitzvot damyeh. When you say Havdalah, it's like make a mitzvah, a bracha for a mitzvah. Because what is a bracha for a mitzvah? What's the reason for it? Mishum da hoda'ahi, because it's some kind of a thanks. And hanami hoda'ahi, this is also some kind of a thanks and a praise for the Mishnah, for the mitzvah of Havdalah. So therefore it has the same rules, and therefore it's considered in this group to be birchat mitzvot. So it's not an exception. So there we go. Leave it there, and we will hopefully continue tomorrow.